Here's the overview of today's presentation. It's really about converging physical and cybersecurity from security practitioners moving in, but then also bringing everything back from analog to digital, which is the transformation, is what we're going to talk about. And that really gets into the technology part. What are the lessons learned? So it's really bridging silos to keep the organization safe and improve workforce experience. The roadmap to success of converging physical and cybersecurity, and how technology, people, and process play a part in this. And we're going to spend a bit more time on technology. I think that's more important and about innovation and efficiencies. We'll talk about how to transform security from a cost center to a business enabler. And then, of course, skills and staffing shortage. How do we bring that all together? Just the agenda, just a quick overview: driving factors of convergence, breaking down the silos, roadmap to convergence, and then success and benefits. So this is the last slide that kind of ties everything in and why it's important. Whenever we put the abstract together, 2023 SIA Security Megatrends came out, but before that, the abstract was written. So we're really focusing on about 3 or 4 items here: cybersecurity, and physical security. Convergent came in as one. Artificial intelligence was another, and workforce development and security as a service, which was software as a service.
In terms of artificial intelligence, this is the type of thing that you can use across the platform, right? Across your environment. You can use it from a conversational UX perspective, right? To talk to your system instead of having to go through forms and reports and get data that way. You can use it to get insights and to be able to predict risks in your organization. So it's important not just to manage risks and to mitigate them, but to predict them so that you can prevent them from happening in the first place. When you talk about workforce development, we'll talk about how you want to tie training into everything else that you do and the certification processes that go with that. So we've got a lot of areas to talk about there. When you think about organizations in general, right, think about, I'm just going to use utilities as an example. You have far-flung transmission stations, power stations, and so on. Well, when you get an alert from that, when you get something on your SOC, right, that says there's a problem here, who do you send? Do you send a person with a gun? Do you send a person with a wrench? Do you send a person with a laptop? And if you send the wrong person, right, this could be at 60 miles away, it could be 30 miles away. If you send the wrong person, you can have very, very negative results there. We had a situation with one of our customers where one of the transmission units was overheating. Well, as it turns out, our sensors had picked up a gunshot in the vicinity. So we were able to correlate that information and understand that the gunshot was probably a cause of the overheating that was happening. And so the company was able to mount the right type of response. Without this kind of convergence, without the ability to bring in data from the physical side, from the IT side, and from the OT side, you would never be able to understand holistically what's going on at any given point in time. And so that's why it's important to have a converged strategy where you look at all of these holistically.
And we've kind of noted, I follow Gartner prediction as well. By 2024, 80% of critical infrastructure organizations will abandon their existing silo security solution provided in order to bridge cyber, physical, and IT risk by adopting a hyper-converged solution. So it's starting. And one of the other factors, and sitting on a board, the C-suites are starting to ask the questions, and actually they're pulling up the security and physical practitioners into that executive meeting now and asking those questions about how safe is your system. And from a physical and cybersecurity, you got to speak the language, right? They're asking it, and the CEOs are coming down on those questions as well. So driving factors, I've listed a number of the driving factors as well.
Sure, yeah. So there's a lot, obviously, right? So there's physical and cyber threats. If you talk to folks who work in the government and look at this all the time, right, they'll tell you it's not a question of if, but when. You're going to have a ransomware type attack in your organization. So being able to be prepared for it, right, is critically important. Emerging technologies, as I've already mentioned this at the start, you have a lot of new technologies coming out in AI, for example. On the mobile side, Apple just announced the NFC wallet, for example, right? Which is a huge step forward in mobile credentials. When you look at cyber-physical convergence platforms, the ability to take advantage of these converged trends and to be able to take advantage of these technologies is going to really help differentiate you and your organization and maintain a more secure environment. budgets, OpEx versus CapEx, this is a huge deal, right? Because when most people think about security, they think about it as a cost center, right? But what we've realized as we worked with our customers and done detailed ROI studies is that security actually can be a business enabler. The ROI on security investments, right, especially convergence investments, is overwhelmingly positive. We've seen numbers as high as 400 to 500% ROI over 5 years. This is huge. And so when you're thinking about it from a budgeting perspective, it's no longer just a cost center. You can actually have it as a capital allocation project. It should compete with any other investment in your company and allow you to take advantage of that. There's growth in regulations. The regulations overall continue to get more and more complex in every single industry out there. Whether you look at healthcare, you look at utilities, you look at airports, you look at finance, you look at any industry out there, education and so on, the number of regulations is becoming more complex. And your ability to comply with that will depend on the kind of technology that you invest in.
Again, as working for a utility in my previous role, 4 audits, it was about 4 audits per year, bringing in cyber and IT groups, and we spend full days. And what they were always looking for compliance, it's a lot of the data. And now with new technology, and we'll talk a bit more about that, being able to capture that data and share it and basically get acceptance on those audits. We also look at new products and buyers. You look at where the product is actually originated from. You look at the procurement, what procurement is doing. There's a lot of companies out there that they claim to fame this and that and validate it. So that's another whole other area, and that could be a full presentation on that one. Skills, through the vertical skill gaps, finding security practitioners from the IT and physical security, and staying up to date on the education, that becomes another issue. And where I came from in the utility and managing grids from North America, basically America to Canada and cross-border, it became more complex. And when we think of physical security practitioners, bringing on new devices onto the network, what does that look like? Validating cyber, you got to make sure, what are you bringing in? And that IT needs to know, and their architects, where that product resides. And so those are some of the driving factors. But now when we start breaking down the silos, again, for my world, you had the IT and OT group. IT, really corporate networks, finance, they manage that. And then you have OT, which is the field devices. So you think of a grid, you think of a water plant, you think of how that's managed and communication. They're kind of scrambling in silos and working together. Then you have the physical security group on this side, and now you've got all 3 of them, right? So they have different reporting structures, objective and skill sets, and how are you going to bring all of that together?
So what keeps the CIO up are things that you would expect, right? Is my network secure? Are my systems secure? Are they patched? Are they updated? And so on. Do I have the right security infrastructure? Do I have the right tools in place? The training becomes a very, very important part of this, because at the end of the day, you're only as secure as your, as the people that work in the organization, right? And if the training is not up to date, if the certifications are not up to date, then you're going to have security lapses. So I think training and managing that, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go into this presentation. Managing the devices on your network, knowing what devices there are, who has access to them, having the ability to terminate access to every single device in the environment with the push of a button for a particular user or for a set of users is critically important. Again, if you know that you're under attack, the first thing that you need to do is shut down access, right? Whether it be for internal users, for external users, and so on. And so the ability to do that is going to be critical. A real-time view, right? This is important. You cannot have a view that is looking at it in hindsight. You have to be able to look at what's happening, unfolding in real time. Ideally, have a view into the future, be able to predict and being able to mitigate physical cyber attacks. There's a whole host of tools out there, right? I think if you look at all of the industries out there, the security industry is probably one of the most diverse in terms of the number of tool sets that you have for intrusion prevention, detection, and so on. The challenge that IT professionals face, right? Security IT professionals face, IT and OT, is how do you gather the data, aggregate the data that's coming in from all of these tools and build that full 360-degree view on top of that allows you to take action. You look at the evolving cybersecurity items, right? Privacy is becoming a much bigger deal. GDPR is kind of the law in many parts of the world now. Insider threats, as an example. Up to 70% of all threats in an organization are insider threats. A single insider threat incident can lead to about somewhere between $5 to $10 million of damage. There's actual financial damage, there's reputational damage, and so on and so forth. Obviously, moving to the cloud and zero trust. Zero trust is a critically important factor. You want to make sure that people have access when they need it, for the time that they need it, and only for what they need, right? The trend in many organizations is someone needs access, whether it be physical access to a site or logical access, like IT access to a particular system. Oh, you need it, I'll give it to you, right? You're visiting the site here, you have access to all of these systems, and no one ever takes those off. So the ability to create an environment where you actually have zero trust. So you have the access that you need when you're traveling to a location, but then that access is removed as soon as you leave. Or when you're going on a leave of absence, your access is automatically terminated till it's reinstated when you come back from leave. Those types of things. So the ability to enforce that is going to be critical.
I think a lot of people can relate to this one on the physical security side. So what keeps the practitioner up at night is my network secured. We're also known as the cost center as well within the organization. So there's regular, basis of cost savings, reduction, efficiencies. You got to justify your budgets, doing more with less. And here's one that kind of slips for a lot of organizations. Does the physical security goals align with the corporate strategy? How does that actually link into corporate strategy? And not all organizations have a physical security department. They may roll up into a health and safety, HR component, business continuity. They may not be standalone. So how does your department roll up to corporate? Because that's where you want to get that optics at with the executive team to say, hey, by the way, this is what I'm doing. Legacy systems with an inherent security gaps. There's this for my organization, which was compliance driven. I moved from on-premise to cloud, and that was a big hurdle. I was one of the first in the whole organization to look at that because we had gaps, vulnerabilities in our existing access control. Physical security networks may not have the same standard refresh cycle as IT systems and run in silos. So again, right, physical security infrastructure, their networks, sometimes IT forgets about us and we're running alone and we're in our own kind of world. How do you bring that together? And that's what we're going to talk about. And then most of the guys, when I used to run certain groups, don't touch what works, right? If it's working, let's just leave it like that. And then really what we're trying to do is move from reactive to proactive. So we're trying to mitigate the threats. And so what is our responsibilities? Well, our main objective is to protect people, assets of the organization. Again, reputation protection, health and safety, and employees. And then we wear many hats, right? You got to remember that. We're business continuity, crisis management, life safety, emergency response. We deal with intelligent programs, threats, internal, external, risk mitigation, data protection, and cybersecurity on physical security assets. And I think that's what misses a lot. We have a lot of devices and equipment out there, but who's validating that and who's actually scanning it and running through systems? And then all to bring it together was workforce experience, productivity, safety, and sustainability. So when we look at physical and cybersecurity convergence, here's the start now of the touch points and how we work together. So when we look at compliance and regulatory, this usually comes down to audits. This is where usually physical and cyber, they get in the room and they got to start going through all the checkboxes and how everything is working. We look at the Internet of Things when we start moving our devices and equipment out to the edge. Are we talking with the IT department? Are we looking at cyber as well? Threats, there's attack on physical and IT devices from external and internal. How are we managing that? Supply chain evaluation. So this is really important. Where the product comes from, got to make sure procurement's involved, you have IT involved, and you got to actually run it through some type of test before you bring it onto the network.
A couple of points here. So, supply chain, right? So when you think about security, it's not just securing the perimeter of your organization, but it's securing the entire supply chain, right? That feeds into it. So how do you make sure that you have the right tools to do that? When you think about asset tracking and asset management, how do you track chain of custody around these assets? How do you make sure that you know at any given point who has access to that, who has the ownership of that particular asset? When you think about identity management, for example, it's the identity management across IT, OT, and physical, right? Because you cannot have a separate set of identities for your physical systems and your badging systems and so on, and a separate set of identities for your IT systems, because you'll never be able to get to that holistic view of security. And you already mentioned audits. Most audits, when you look at it, right, when you look at the rules around audits in most industries, they include both physical as well as IT access patterns, right? So tracking all of that becomes critical. That's where we start to now converge on the, in our security models.
Yeah, and so when we look at R&D investment, working from physical and cybersecurity, bringing together, testing new products, technology. So this will be probably for a lot of the physical security. When you're looking at updating your infrastructure, cameras, access cards, all of that, there's going to be a mind shift on-premise versus cloud. That's another topic. You're going to have to bring the cyber and IT group in, look at taking that from on-prem to cloud, and who's going to start looking after that, right? It's usually IT in the past for on-prem, but when you go to cloud, then it's a different group that looks after it. It's actually your own group that would probably manage that. You bring cyber and physical together, then you get the awareness training. So that's another component, and that basically looks at securing the organization. And then future-proofing security, safety, it brings it all together from across the board. So we're looking at the roadmap to convergence. So you kind of look at a bit of the NIST framework, but you look at some of the attributes that are there: identify, protect, detect, respond, recovery. So there's kind of three pillars of that whole convergence from physical and cybersecurity. It's the people, process, and technology. So we look at people, we start with people and the value worker recruitment. You were hearing about the Great Resignation and everything. I've hired people within my organization, and over the past many years, it's about cross-training. So what we've seen in my organization as physical security practitioners, we brought in IT, we worked together. We actually set up a CIP group, which is Critical Infrastructure Protection Group, and we cross-trained from physical and cybersecurity personnel, and we started running that program. There's the training and development. So there's really have to clearly define the roles and responsibility and certifications.
Absolutely. So when we think about certifications, and again, most regulated industries, in order to be able to access certain environments, you have to be certified. So managing that entire process, right, from hire to retire becomes critical. When you think about retention, Joey, one thing I want to point out is the experience of your security staff. If the security team is spending a lot of time managing badges, if they're spending a lot of time trying to pull reports, fixing errors that happen due to integration problems and so on, that experience is not going to be great, right? So just as you have your rideshare app and you can click on a destination and you have an AI algorithm that maps the most optimal path to wherever you need to go, and the payments happen automatically in the background, you want to make sure that your security system is providing that same type of experience to your staff and to your team internally as well. And how do you achieve that, and how do you do that, right? That's really the key. It's about workplace experience, and it's about the actual workforce experience as well.
And then when we look at technology, I think this is one where we start looking at the whole digital transformation. I was set up with an on-premise system for many years, and we converted it. But regardless, we have to look at the innovation part of it, the cost, really the operational efficiencies. So when we looked at moving from on-prem to the cloud, IT department was reluctant, didn't understand. They were a little worried about their positions. And once they got into a number of our meetings, they said it makes sense. And again, I was one of the first within the organization to move from on-prem to cloud. And so what we gained out of that is quite a bit of efficiencies. We had the, always patched up to date, train experts, monthly updates, eliminated problems with the costs associated with the hardware, the service calls, and then the ongoing burden of upgrades in hardware. And we actually had a total cost of ownership for about 30% to the good. And so that's one component. But then when you start looking at green attributes, again, it's the servers within the data. So coming from a facilities background and understanding about buildings, building automation systems, bringing this system in, and then now looking at all the other different applications that we were moving to the cloud, it was a win-win for the organization, and we became green certified within that organization. And that was just only a component of software as a service, access control as a service is what we went with. And so when you look at technology and the whole digital transformation and being proactive in security, this is, the functionality that we gain out of the system. Mobility, we had the mobile credentials, onboarding. So our onboarding used to be a manual process where somebody would come in, sign a document, information, and then I would load it up into the system. Now with automation, it started in HR and then it filtered through, and IT was involved with all of this and brought it all the way through. So when I opened up my access control, there was the person and I can just issue the card right away. So when you look at that, that's efficiency on its own. Visitor management systems, if you're looking at that as well, for us, it was about who's in the building and actually capturing the data of that individual who was in the building and where they are. So I had 2 security guards, then I can reduce it to 1 because it started with a manual process, but now it was all automated where it was kind of a self-help kiosk when they come in. Mass notification for mustering, so it tied into our business continuity. And then if you guys as physical security dashboards, what are your dashboards like? How do you get up to the executive team, right? You want some high profile to be up there. So use dashboards to look at threat analysis and things like that, and make sure you're part of some group that gets to the senior office. So what this all kind of comes down to is, for me, it was about audit and compliance. And that's what we achieved out of going, looking at this whole digital transformation. And all of this came with cyber IT departments working in sync to get to this point.
When we look at the entire hire to retire life cycle of an employee, right, or a contractor or a visitor, you have a person on their first day at the job. And in many cases, what we've noticed is when you come into the job on the first day, well, you might need access to certain IT systems. You may need access to certain physical security sites, environments, and so on. And all of those are not set up the day that you walk in. So you end up having to spend hours, sometimes days, waiting to get all of the accesses lined up. You go to the far end of that on the retire life cycle or the termination life cycle, and we've actually seen situations with customers where they may have somebody leave an organization and 6 months later still have access, right? Or at least a few days later still have access to the organization. That's a huge risk, right? The person has left the organization, they should not have access to it. So the ability to automate the process, in your last slide, you talked about all of those areas for automation. Well, this gives you an overall view of that. You look at training. Let's say I need a certain certification in order to be able to access a secure site or a SIP control site, for example, for utilities, or a biohazard level site for healthcare or research type space. Well, what if my training expires? Who's tracking that? So your system has to be able to talk to your LMS, right? To talk to your certification system. You need to be able to connect with the access control system, with the LMS system, to ensure, firstly, you remind the person and say, hey, your training expires in a month. You need to renew access. Can you do that? Well, if you don't do it, we're going to escalate it. We're going to talk to your manager. We're going to send a note to your manager. If you still don't do it and the date passes, we're going to immediately shut your access down. And then as soon as you do the training, there's no going back and filing new paperwork and so on. We automatically pick that information up from the training system and re-enable the access. When you're traveling, for example, from one location to the other, right? And you may need access to a site that you're going to, well, your system, it could be Concur, it could be any other system. You need to tie into that system so that as soon as you go there, if you need certain approvals, you initiate a workflow to get those approvals. But you get approval to go to that site, and then you automatically remove access once you leave that site. When you're thinking about contractors, you might have a global policy, right? So you might have a policy framework that says contractors only have access to these secure sites during their contract hours. Well, their shift hours change every week. And so when you think about, again, automation, you have to be able to pull data from the time and attendance system and be able to automatically correlate it with the policy that you have set and says, okay, this is a contractor. They are only allowed by our policy to access this site during their shift hours. If their shift has changed, they should not be accessing it during that time, right? Across the board, when you think about the entire journey, the ability to automate these actions, increase productivity as well. And this is how you make security from a cost center into an actual business enabler that provides positive ROI Even if you can provide a few hours of increased productivity for each employee in a company, if you're a reasonably large size organization, you'll be looking at, if not millions of dollars, at least hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of savings. We've gone to companies, we've actually sat with them, done time and motion type studies and measured this. The automation of the entire process, right? In addition to keeping you compliant, making sure that you're providing zero trust access and zero trust security, the ability to do this all the way from the first day of the company to the last day in the organization, whether you're an employee, whether you're a contractor, whether you're a hybrid worker, you work from home or you work in the office and so on, this is absolutely critical. So this slide talks about providing that 360-degree view across the enterprise. I'll give you an example. We implemented a software at an airport, at a large airport, and the airport had a policy where people who were in the baggage handling department should only access the baggage handling areas during their shift hours. Well, as it turns out, as soon as we started to look at the data, we started to get alerts that there were a set of individuals who were accessing the environment after their shift hours. Well, there is no reason for a contractor who's a baggage handler, as an example, to be accessing the area after their shift is over, right? So whatever they're doing there is not good. It could be, at best case, potential theft type situation. Worst case, it could be a significant security situation. The TSA actually terminated the employment of several individuals that were responsible for that. So when you think about this kind of a 360-degree view, it's not just about mitigating the threats, it's about preventing them from happening in the first place. Another example is if you pull information from all of these different systems, from your HR systems, from your IT logs, from your physical access logs, and so on, and you pull that together, you can use machine learning to create a very, very detailed and powerful risk profile for every single individual that accesses your organization, whether it's an employee, whether it's a contractor, and so on. The value of that is if you see someone's risk score going up, you are able to take automated action. So you can automatically alert the security office, you can alert the person's manager, or you can actually shut down their access. There are so many cases, for example, if you have an employee who has a 2-week term notice in their HR system, and now they are requesting access to some other system, right? Well, if you look at it in silos, if you don't have the security convergence model, you might say, well, this employee in this role requesting access to a particular system is not unusual. But when you correlate that to the fact that they are on a 2-week term notice, that becomes unusual. Or if they have a certain access pattern in the organization, they've been coming to work at a certain time, they've been leaving, there's a certain pattern established over 5 years, and suddenly their access changes. They suddenly start showing up on weekends. Well, it may or may not be an issue, but at least you need to be alert to the fact there's a behavioral change. And the only way to do that across the board is to have this comprehensive view. Then you can use machine learning models, for example, artificial intelligence, to be able to track those anomalies and to be able to action on those anomalies.
So when we're looking at, we've talked about people, technology, now we look at process. So it starts at the governance model, really at the top. Board, CEO, and the chief security officer all coming together, understanding this is how we're moving. Always one voice at the table, so it's at C level, one voice, uniformity, and confidence. Framework and standards. So here's something for physical security practitioners. You see a lot of frameworks and standards on the cyber IT side. There's a lot of components that come over onto the physical security. So we're getting more and more connected. And I think as a physical security practitioner, you may want to start looking at the different frameworks, the different standards that are out there, and linking that whole part of physical security to it. Education and training, again, develop skills and cross-training. So it's really about a shared responsibility model, bringing everybody together. And as I mentioned before, establish KPIs on the physical security side. IT will have all theirs in cyber, but what are physical security key metrics? So you can make sure you have that. What's also missing there is a maturity. What does the maturity model looks like? How mature is your physical security program? How do you rate it? How do you rank it, right? I mean, IT and cyber, they have that. So coming together, you're going to probably have to really think about that, and what really are you doing that drives, security, the efficiency of security within your business unit.
When we talk about innovation, I think, let me pull out my phone here, but one of the things that I'm particularly very excited about is the mobile wallets, right? So if you think about the ESG impact of not having all these plastic badges around, not having the printers that run out of ink and having to replace those all the time, right? If you think about the additional security, you lose your badge, someone can use that badge and get in. But if you have a mobile credential with two-factor authentication, even if they steal your phone, they can't get in. The security associated with that is just on a different level. If you're not leveraging artificial intelligence in your environment today, you're missing out on a massive opportunity. It's impossible for a human being to be able to manage the risk across all of these different environments. So you have to be able to use AI. And it's not just using AI for one task or another. It's using AI as a foundation for your security program, as a foundation for your security model. So, when you think about the success and benefits, right, it's better understanding of the whole environment, the cyber hygiene, as we call it, a better focus on threats, and not just threat mitigation, but threat prevention. How do you understand what's likely to be a risk? How do you do risk-based security versus just a blanket security model, right? Zero trust security, risk-based security, these are important. One of the areas that I really want to focus on is maximizing ROI. When you think about IT systems versus physical systems, well, any kind of change in an organization is very hard. But changing an IT system is placing an IT system and all of the change control that goes around that, all of the integrations. Replacing a hardware system is extraordinarily difficult, right? You have to go panel by panel, door by door, replace potentially not just the system, but the wiring associated with that. Those tend to be multi-year projects. And you cannot afford to stand still for all the years that will take you to upgrade. So you need a model that allows you to retain that investment, that allows you to keep that, but at the same time, take advantage of all of the advances that we've talked about to be able to create that better governance model, to be able to create that risk-based security model.
So when you bring, the two groups together, your SOC, what does that look like? Now you have 24-hour operation. And then so a lot of that will, technology, what's coming in, how is it automated? How is it monitored? So think of IT, cyber incidents occur, physical security, how it comes in, and then it reports up to a chief security officer. So there's better control of that. Access levels. We went from our onboarding paper, now it's all automated. It starts in HR, but it's part of IT who's put it together. And now it shows up on my access control system to say, oh yeah, this person has joined the organization. A big one for me was the IT asset management plan. And I'm not sure, as physical security practitioners, what does your budgets look like? How are you capturing life cycle? How often do you change out your servers if you're on-prem? That's to consideration as well. IT usually has more of a mature framework of that and managing it and the whole budgeting. Physical security may not have that much. And then when it comes down to, audits, you're all in the room together. It's really about physical and cyber security, their networks. And then with the amount of data intelligence you're getting from all the different type of systems, what information really do you need from the system that can generate reports to get up to senior management? And again, I'll stress it again for, the security practitioners, your framework. What are you following as your security plan? What does your plan look like? What's in your plan? And how are you linking it to any of the other frameworks and any standards that are out there?
Yeah, so this is not just Joey and me standing up here and telling you, convergence is important, right? So this is CISA. CISA is the organization that is responsible for cybersecurity in the United States. They produced a report that talked about one of the biggest threats that we have, one of the biggest vulnerabilities that we have in organizations is the siloed security approach. The IT organization being siloed from the CSO organization, right? From the physical security organization. And they talk specifically, these are all pulled directly from the report. They talk specifically about the value of a converged security approach. So this report was actually published March 2023. It's a great document if you haven't looked at it. It's the National Cybersecurity Strategy that was published and released by the White House. As our national infrastructure, as our industries come under increasing threat from private criminal organizations, increasing threat from state organizations, how do you support and how do you maintain security in that kind of an environment? Hopefully most of you have looked at it and seen it, but if you haven't, it's worth a read. And it again talks about and highlights the value of a lot of the things that we were talking about during this presentation.
So just kind of recapping, I think when I've seen other organizations, when they converge together, physical cybersecurity, it comes down to the culture, and it's got to start at the top and it's got to be brought down. So if people are going through the transition of it, sometimes it's usually the digital transformation. It's an initiative that you're going to undertake and how you're going to bring it together. And we've kind of highlighted all the, the touch points and how when you do merge together, where things are going to come out. So thanks to everyone for attending. Thank you.